Twain, Foundations of Business Strategy, as we complete our first week. I'm excited to see the level of interest and participation in the course. People continue to sign up. We have close to 87,000 people now taking the course. Very excited to see that we have groups from all around the world, from Australia, Africa, Asia, Europe, North and South America, participating and forming study groups. We've had a lot of activity, over 150,000 videos viewed, and over 60,000 posts now to the discussion forums. I've enjoyed reading through many of your posts. I like seeing the rich conversations that are taking place, specifically around the case discussions that we have asked you to engage in. Let me talk briefly about why and what the purpose of this weekly debrief is. My intent now is not to tell you the quote-unquote answer to the case. In the Darden Classroom, that's not what we do. As faculty members, we serve as facilitators for discussion. The questions that I've posed to you around this week Google, and in many of the cases we'll discuss, they're not wrong or right answers, but there are answers that are better argued than others, or points of view that are better argued than others. So these cases serve as an opportunity for you to discuss the tools in the toolkit, to apply them to a real case, and to once again hone this ability at strategic analysis and ultimately making arguments to support your points of view. So my hope in the next few minutes here is, again, not to answer any of the questions that I raised about Google, but merely help you and illustrate for you how you might approach some of these questions and the tools that we're asking you to apply. So let's begin with the first question. This question's about Google's strategy statement. As many of you observed, you go to the website, you go to the annual report, you can get good information about how they express their mission. And you can see both their value statement about do no evil and also their mission about organizing the world's information. But as we discussed in the video lectures, strategy is emerging from both the mission but also the intent and the actual actions that a firm takes. When we look at Google, one thing that many of you observe, which I think is an important place to start, is that the vast majority, 98% or so, of their revenues come from paid online search. So despite their intent of being a worldwide organizer of information, their revenue stream and their business model is still, you could argue, fairly narrowly focused on this world of paid online search. So one of the questions that we'll eventually get to is, to what extent can they scale up in this domain and maybe diversify into other areas? So to help us out with that and to break this down further, let's start with our competitor analysis, the first tool we asked you to apply to the Google case. Now, the first question of the competitor analysis, what is their industry, who are their competitors, seems deceptively easy. But as many of you pointed out, that as you start to dive into that question, this is not only a critical question, but a challenging question to answer. To quote Markle, one of the discussion forum posts, he says, "It is easy to identify Google's competitors because all the technology companies are actually competitors of Google. But to decide which are the most important ones is really difficult." So I think this is spot on here. At the end of the day, how do we prioritize and understand which are the competitors most important for us to consider in Google's competitor set? Now, why is industry identification challenging? Well, there's many reasons. One might be product differentiation. Think about the auto industry. If you were analyzing, let's say, Porsche, is it worthwhile or necessary to understand what Kia is doing? Another player within the auto industry for sure, but very different strategic positions given the differentiation in their products. It might be geographic segmentation. There are industries like, let's say, cellular wireless carriers that are very geographically segmented. If you're analyzing the European cellular phone market, is it necessary to really understand US carriers and their competitive positions? In some industries, what we'll see are close substitutes, which are between otherwise distinctive groups. If you're looking at the soft drink industry, it's probably worthwhile to understand something about the sports drink industry and how they interact and substitute for one another. Another challenge is that industries evolve. If we looked at IBM 30 years ago or so, we would think of them as a hardware manufacturer in the computer segment, mainframe computers, personal computers, and the like. However, they've transformed themselves over the years to really be more of a services company than a traditional hardware manufacturing company. So industries and firms evolve. And then finally, in various industries, there might be differences in technology that lead to different strategic groupings. If we look at the steel mill industry, there are two dominant large technologies. There are what we call traditional integrated steel mills, and there are these others called mini mills, different technology, smaller scale. Now, arguably, they're competing with one another, but in very different ways with different technology. So how do you go about identifying competitors and defining industries? Well, the gold standard would be what's called cross-price elasticity. And we're going to talk more about that in the video lectures for next week, so I don't want to dive into it too much right now, but it's the idea of the substitutability between one product class and another. The greater the substitutability, the more that it's going to be within competition with another. The easier way, and probably the more useful way of thinking about this question of identifying competitors, is to think about strategic groups. Recognize that there will be various groupings of firms that then you can then prioritize. And then the key is to spend, obviously, your most rigorous analysis and most rigorous efforts on those competitors that are closest to you, and then keep aware of others that might be further afar down the stream for you. So for Google, as many have observed, clearly an Apple computer is the one that you want to be thinking about is a core competitor, but there might be others that you want to prioritize as well, maybe a little further down the list, that are still important to consider. All right, moving on, let's consider our environmental analysis. Looking through the posts, you all did a very good job identifying a number of the important factors impacting Google's competitive environment. In general, I would just observe that for different firms and different industries, the relative emphasis on some categories versus others will vary. So in the case of Google, as many of you pointed out, there's a lot to be said about technology and how technology is developing and challenging that industry. Next week, we're going to discuss the beer industry, the micro beer industry. There's one where technology might be less important. Maybe it's more about social cultural attitudes and the like that are going to be important drivers for that industry. The value of the environmental analysis, though, is to get you to think about all of these categories so you don't miss anything important. And I was very pleased to see that a number of you identified and understood that Google faces a number of critical challenges in the political arena. Things around censorship, around privacy issues, and that's affecting them in many of their markets in North America and Asia and the like. And that's an important consideration for them as they think about competition moving forward. The third question we asked was this one about competitive markets. Is this a perfectly competitive market that Google operates in? And if not, is there an opportunity for sustained competitive advantage for Google? These sets of questions are in essence the heart of strategic analysis and questions that we're going to be asking over the next couple weeks repeatedly here. Really the heart of a number of the tools that we will be applying in a variety of cases here. They very much highlight and suggest the idea of a capabilities analysis, which we'll discuss in 2 weeks, which gets at this question about how do you create a sustained competitive advantage. And clearly and important to that conversation and discussion is this question of imitation. To what degree can what Google do be imitated by others? And many of you pointed out some of the tensions there. Maybe it's the user interface with Google. It's very clean and simple. People like it. However, there are lots of ways that others have been able to imitate that as well. So maybe that isn't the sustained competitive advantage. Some have suggested maybe it was a technology advantage that allows Google to be so successful. The core technology behind their search. Clearly, they have intellectual property protection on that, so that could be, their algorithms could be the kind of the secret sauce for them. Though some observe that there are competitors out there with viable alternatives. Microsoft, never known for their own modesty, said of Google's system, Google's a very nice system, but compared to my vision for, this is for Bing, it's pathetic. Now we can believe that or not, but the point being there are viable competitors out there with other technology, and perhaps maybe they might be comparable or even better than the search algorithms for Google. Once again, open for debate. Many of you pointed to Google's brand. That's an interesting one, and many people correctly pointed out, this is one of those cases where the brand has become a verb that we use now. You Google something when you want to say you want to search something online. I would just observe that be cautious with brands. Brands can be very powerful and very much a sustained competitive advantage, but they can also be ephemeral. They might only have a temporary advantage. If we look over the history of search engines, we see Yahoo, Alta Vista, Lycos. There have been other dominant search engines before Google. Now Google has had a nice long run here, maybe suggesting that there is some sustained advantage. But one could imagine there might be a new duplicate that comes on the block with a better algorithm that suddenly takes over and has maybe even a more substantial brand. So just be cautious there. What we'll talk about with capabilities analysis is often sustained competitive advantage comes from a combination of higher order capabilities. And there were a number of threads of discussion that begin to kind of explore that and suggest that. A nice quote from Diego, who says at the end, people are what really matter nowadays. They are what define a company will succeed or not, and suggesting that it's the human resource practices of Google that really have allowed them to thrive and succeed. So finally, we end with this question about, would you invest in Google? Now, an important technical note here. Really, the question of investment is slightly different than whether you think they are a successful firm or not. Because a question of investment is not only the future success of Google, but also to what extent does the market already value that future success? And is there a difference there? It may very well be that you think Google will continue to be profitable, but is a lousy investment because the market actually thinks that their potential is even greater than what you think it might be. Now, theoretically, the market value of the firm, basically the market capitalization, if you think of it that way, of the firm, should be equal to the stream of future discounted cash flows accruing to the firm. These are profits minus future investments accruing to the firm. These cash flows to the bottom line we discussed briefly in one of the videos there. Now, while it's beyond our scope here to do a full discounted cash flow analysis of Google, if you do kind of crunch the numbers, looking at their current revenues and looking at where the current stock market price is, it suggests that Google needs to continue to grow both their revenues and earnings quite substantially at a percentage basis over the next 10 years or so. And one of the things you can realize is it's very hard to see how Google can justify its current stock price if it just stays within its paid online search universe. The reasons for this is, once again, not that Google isn't successful, but they already have an incredibly dominant market share within that space. And that business, while still growing, is not growing at the rate necessary to justify its current stock price. So in many ways, a bet on Google, a bet to invest on Google, is a bet that they're going to diversify their earnings in some way in the future. Now, many discussions pointed out there are various ways that they can do that. They could sell software as a service. They could diversify wholly into whole nother businesses. But again, an argument to invest in Google is an argument that they will somehow find other additional streams of revenue and earnings into the future to justify their price. All right, let me end by saying, please, I encourage you to keep up with the course material. We'll be releasing the second week's videos and other materials on Sunday evening. Encourage you to keep participating in the forums. I've been very pleased by seeing the level of discourse and the like in those. As I indicated in my email yesterday, please begin thinking about your final project. Though you have 6 more weeks to get this done, do encourage you to get on that early. And to point out again that the tools we're developing in your toolkit can be applied to your final project even starting today. Start thinking about a competitor analysis. Start thinking about an environmental analysis for your chosen organization. All right, I hope you've had a good week, and I hope to see you next week. Thank you very much.